Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very special Retail ThinkTank inspiration session. I'm Alicia Esposito, Vice President of Content for Retail Touchpoints, and it's a very special conversation because I have Hamza Khan, partner at McKinsey, on the line with me. Hamza, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Alicia.
And you have been very busy recently, you and your team, because McKinsey recently issued the report Value Creation in the Metaverse. And frankly, everybody's talking about the metaverse, what it means, how to embrace it, how to use it for your business. So let's start there. Let's start at the top with the big report that everybody is talking about right now. Give us an overview of value creation in the metaverse.
Sounds good. I'm very happy to. So we published the report very recently. There's a lot of talk and maybe even we could use the word hype around the metaverse, but it also has significant value. So the purpose of the report was to practically separate the two for our client executives and help them decide what actions, if any, to take right now and what to prepare for going forward. The report builds on a number of proprietary sources of insight, including we did research with 3,400 consumers globally, with 500 business executives globally to see how they're seeing the metaverse shape their sectors and their companies. We had interviews with over 10, metaverse world builders and the companies that are already active on them, the companies and brands already active on them. We have a value estimation approach aggregated from multiple consumer and enterprise use cases. And then we had industry specific perspectives shipped alongside our clients in those industries. So it's fairly comprehensive. I will say though, just as the metaverse continues to evolve, we're just keeping an open mind and evolving our own perspective on it as well. But even just based on preliminary estimates that we do have, we estimate the metaverse has value creation potential of up to $5 trillion US by 2030. And a significant share of it is driven by our expectation that e-commerce will become much more immersive going forward. And we're already starting to see some of that happen with social commerce and more recently experiential commerce, but we think that's going to be a big shift towards the metaverse over time. And we will keep refining this preliminary estimate, right? But in essence, it is just too large to ignore.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up that point that, you and your team are keeping an open mind as far as, what the opportunities are, the applications, because it is so fast moving, which leads me to the big question. I think a lot of people who are seeing the metaverse in headlines and news coverage and like, okay, well, what does that really mean? And you brought up a few things. You brought up e-commerce, social commerce, experiential commerce. So in McKinsey's world, how is the metaverse defined? What does it entail exactly?
So the metaverse is often talked about in extremes. I wouldn't say I wouldn't say McKinsey has our own definition of it, but the one that we are most closely aligned to um, is seeing the metaverse as an evolution of today's internet from something that we primarily observe to something that we are more deeply immersed in. It is a relatively broad definition, and we that's the one we're closely aligned to very consciously. So at its most basic, the metaverse consists of uh, there are so even though there is a lot of debate on the actual definition, there are certain elements of it that there is convergence on, right? So there is a sense of deep immersion, there is real time interactivity, so this sense of always on. There is user agency, so or user just we'll define agency as like user ID, the ability for users and people to communicate with others, to transact for goods, to own assets, and so on, right? So that's those we think are the most basic elements of how the metaverse is shaping up. And then ultimately, the end state also includes uh, use cases going far beyond gaming and digital entertainment. It includes concurrency, so the ability for a very large number of people to interact simultaneously, and then interoperability across platforms and devices.
Got it.
But that last one in particular, we're not there yet, right? So that's more of just how we believe the metaverse will continue to shape.
No, that's great. And everybody watching this right now may see me taking notes because there are so many layers to this and it's such a new space. So I am learning right along with all of you. So I want to go back to that $5 trillion number, because when I first saw it, I was like, whoa, like that is huge. And I'm sure for a lot of the business leaders and practitioners who are keeping track of this space, that's an attention grabber, right? And a good number that you can maybe share with someone on your team that could be a bit of a naysayer or a skeptic about all of this, which I mean, especially in retail, there are some of those. But I want to get into that specific number, how that value is being created, where the investment is coming from. Again, this idea of immersive commerce, social commerce, very big right now in retail. But where else is the investment coming from? Where else is their interest?
So let's start with skepticism, right? And there is ample skepticism right now, and we don't see that going away anytime soon. Um, but we've seen waves of that in the past as well. So as part of that skepticism, there is this notion of why now, and we have seen similar levels of excitement for example, Second Life in 2003, right? Uh, what's different now is just it's a fundamentally different world in very many ways, right? There are tech advancements since that time, so across 5G, cloud, and edge computing, and just enhanced computing capacity and power, and things like the reduction in the cost of production of VR and AR devices, right, which just continues to go down. There are things that are different, like just shifts in consumer readiness. Consumers are now already going back to the point around e-commerce and social commerce. They're already very open to and keen on it, right? There are 66% of the respondents in our consumer research said they're excited about the metaverse. They're open to it, right? So even though there continues to be debate around what this will be exactly, there's just a lot of consumer openness and keenness for it and to see what comes next. We're already seeing a wider set of use cases beyond gaming, whether you talk about consumer use cases or enterprise, it's already happening. And there is a shift in this model of brand marketing, right? Which is, it's much more consumer led now. So again, whether you talk about social commerce or you talk about user generated content or you talk about the entire creator influencer community that's come up around it, it is a lot more user driven and consumer driven. And so all of these are drivers of why we think it is different this time around, and it is a much more structural shift that we're seeing with the metaverse right now. There is also a related notion of this is just gaming, right? And as a result, this is just niche. And why are we putting a new name on something that we've already been doing for very many years? So one, I think like this is just gaming is a bit misleading, right? Because it's easy to forget that there are about 3 billion gamers in the world, and gaming as an economy is larger than movies and music combined. So it's fairly sizable, right? Like even if it is gaming, it is not just gaming. And that doesn't yet include sort of enterprise specific metaverse use cases, right? So we're not talking about digital twinning in manufacturing, for example. If I take one example, we're not talking about AR assisted surgery or AR assisted product design. That's not in gaming, but it is in the definition of the metaverse. Um, and so it is not one, even if it was gaming, that's pretty sizable. And we do agree that gaming is the on ramp to the metaverse, but it goes far beyond that as well. And there's a lot of that that's driving the investor confidence as well. So that's why there's so much investment going into it, right? There's a long-term structural view on this being a shift of, like, a paradigm shift in how we think of and how we use the internet. And so in the first half of this year alone, there is one large gaming related investment or investment commitment that's helped drive metaverse related investments to about 120 billion. That's the first half of this year, and it's more than twice of all of last year, which was already a big year, right? So we're seeing a rapid acceleration in funding going into the metaverse and metaverse related space, and it's driven by a number of tech companies that have been building the metaverse from much before last year, much before Facebook's name change to Meta, and that's across software, hardware, infrastructure. We're seeing investments from companies that are already in their second and third waves of experimentation with their brands in online worlds. We're seeing a growing ecosystem of creators, developers, agencies, and other solutions come up around the metaverse. And then we're seeing a growing number of funds, investment funds dedicated to metaverse and Web3 investments in general, right? So it's coming. So ample investment and coming from very many different directions into a space that just continues to grow.
Yeah, thank you for peeling back those layers because there is a lot there. I do want to dig into the consumer side of things in particular because obviously for brands and retailers, marketers, strategists, it's like go where your consumer is, and I think your point about gaming resonates because it seems like thinking about or looking at the metaverse, a lot of brands and retailers have looked at those gaming platforms as as I don't want to say easy entry point, but an existing entry point that they know their audience is. And like you said, it's very community driven, interactive. I think the idea of kind of co-creating in these spaces is an impactful one. So as far as like consumer watering holes, so to speak, like where the consumer is going, it seem like gaming is the big space to watch, or are there other approaches or areas of the metaverse where you're seeing a lot of consumer eagerness and excitement?
So I would say gaming is definitely a space to watch, right? It is not the sort of the start and end of the metaverse, but consumers have been in large online game related worlds for a very long time, and and even more importantly, they've been spending not just time there but also money there as well, right? And we call them multiplayer games, and we call them microtransactions. And microtransactions has its own separate debate as well, which we may be able to have at some other point. But but our research shows that just like that is, it's like I mentioned before, it's acting as the on ramp into worlds that then extend far beyond gaming, right? So you go from gaming to broader digital entertainment. So think of digital entertainment, the likes of these large scale concerts in Fortnite as one example. And so there's gaming, and then there's broader digital entertainment. And then beyond digital entertainment, there are other use cases, including, say, education, fitness, health, everything else that's like consumer driven use cases. And we're seeing a lot of openness to it from consumers. So just to give you a few insights from the research that we just did, which is again a global base of consumers, roughly 2/3 of them are excited about transitioning everyday activities to the metaverse, right? Which is a fairly large number. There's about 60% of them that say that they actually would prefer at least one day-to-day life activity in the metaverse instead of in real life. So there's a preference shift as well happening for at least certain activities. There are roughly 80% of them that have made purchases in online worlds in the last 12 months. That's again a very high number. And there's roughly 20% of that population that's actually purchased NFTs as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
And again, NFTs, it's a whole separate conversation too. But these are large numbers of consumers that are not only interested in it, but they've been trying, they've had exposure to, and they've been trying the underlying behaviors in gaming worlds that are relatively easy to translate to non-gaming worlds as well. And so and that's what gives us confidence in the long-term staying power of the metaverse too. Just consumers are used to it. They're used to it in much more of a gaming context, and that's true. But we think that that's why it acts as the on-ramp to non-gaming broader use cases as well. So that's on the consumer side of things, right? I do think though there's a separate part to your question, which is so there's the notion that companies and brands, they want to be where the consumers are. And I think that's true for very many of them. It will depend a little bit also on whether we're talking about consumer brands or B2B or enterprise companies. And so that's why we did the business sentiment survey as well. And this is also like executives that are from across different sectors, across different countries, almost 500 of them. And what we found, and this is something that rarely happens in McKinsey, in large-scale McKinsey research, is that 95% of them believe that the metaverse will have a positive impact on their industry within 5 to 10 years. 95% is not, it's not 100%, but it's pretty close to it. And we don't usually get 100% responses to questions that are this global in nature. So there's a general sense of confidence that this is big and this is going to impact their industries, and with the right effort and the right sort of foresight and planning, that it could be a positive effect, right? Because that's what everyone wants. There are a third of business executives that say that it will significantly change the way their industry operates. There are about a fourth of executives that say that they expect over 15% of their revenues to be influenced by the metaverse going forward in the next 5 years. So a large share of the business community as well, and these executives cut across B2B, B2C, right? So it's not just a consumer-driven brands. It is also non-gaming use cases, like I mentioned, manufacturing or healthcare or education or others, where the confidence level and the staying power of the metaverse and the need to do something about it is fairly high.
That's amazing. That 95% number, that's incredible. I feel like in all of the research that I've seen, I've never seen such a rallying around a concept in terms of positive sentiment. So obviously, you noted B2B and B2C industries and companies are taking note of this, are saying that the metaverse will have an impact on how they operate, a positive impact. And there's a lot of testing going on, again, especially in retail. But are there any particular sectors that are currently thriving, or you think are most poised to thrive in the metaverse?
Um, so we can talk about we can talk about examples that we can see right now, right? In terms of what happens within like 5 years from now, I think it's a bit harder to say.
Sure.
And I would and I think anyone who gives you a view on like here's specifically what will happen in these sectors in 5 years, is I would take that with a pinch of salt. But but what we're already seeing is, so some of the leading brands in, for example, the fashion space have been fairly active in online worlds in recent months, and it's almost a natural transition, right? Because there are fashion and luxury brand shoppers and fans, brand fans that are already spending significant time browsing on their screens, and looking for not only the product but the whole experience that comes with it, right? So the whole brand storytelling element of it, and that's this shift towards, even if we don't talk about the metaverse for a second, that's the shift towards more immersive commerce that we're seeing anyway, and we have been seeing for a longer time, even before this conversation on the metaverse picked up in the last few years. We see this kind of consumer and shopper engagement shifting faster to the metaverse, because what the metaverse does, if we go back to the definition, it provides this sense of immersion, and it amplifies that for existing consumer engagement, right? And so we think like that, and we think that's what fashion brands have picked up on as well. And so we're going to continue to see more innovation there from just fashion, beauty, luxury brands that have a need for more immersive consumer engagement. If you go to the other side, we'll take a different example of retail, right? So let's talk about retail. So physical retail has already been moving towards more experience-led retail, because the convenience part of physical retail is now being challenged by e-commerce. And so when there's already a need for experience-driven retail, right, and good retail experience, I think experience is a key word here, then the metaverse again opens up new opportunities, right? So whether you think of AR-fueled product discovery, or whether you think of in-store events that bring together virtual and real worlds, or whether you think of the ability to tell product and brand stories in much more engaging formats, or whether you then think of the retail media or advertising opportunities on top of that, it does open up a lot more. It does open up a lot more opportunities for retailers, and so that's a slightly different angle on it, just based on sector dynamics, right? I'll take a third one that's very, very different, which is financial services, and and for financial services, in some ways, the impact is it goes far beyond the metaverse as well, right? Because it's then not just the metaverse, but it is also blockchain in general. It is also cryptocurrencies, and so there's a lot more disruption in financial services as well. And then there's the integrative effect of all of it, and that gives rise to the need for new products and services. So, for example, asset-backed lending, where the asset is virtual assets, right? Instead of physical assets, which is what we've had so far, or it gives rise to new ways of engaging consumers, both in sales journeys, but also in service journeys. So imagine being able to engage with the bank and getting to your answers in a much more immersive manner. And then it opens up the potential for just new business models for financial services players as well. Um, and so that looks very different, right? There is manufacturing that I've mentioned previously, there is health, but it varies, right? But I think it is large enough to say that there is no sector, and I think the 95% shows that as well. There is no sector that will be completely untouched, whether you talk about the range of private sectors, I guess, or the public sector, because we're seeing a number of national and city level governments drive forward their own metaverse initiatives as well. It is large enough that it touches all sectors in different ways, and so then they have to respond differently to it as well. But it does have implications for, and it will have an effect on all sectors.
Yeah. And it doesn't just impact the customer experience either. I mean, I'm hearing rumblings of like, what does work look like in the metaverse,
Mm-hmm.
which I think that's a whole other 20-minute conversation. So we won't get into that today. But Hamza, this has been super enlightening. Again, really appreciate you taking the time. Before I let you go, though, obviously we talked about a lot of great findings in the report. A lot of how this space is going to touch or impact different industries and consumers. So as you know, the folks watching this right now, take this conversation with them and try to apply it or see how they can apply the metaverse. Do you have any final takeaways, best practices? Because like I said, there's a lot to unpack here. So any pointers to help them on their journey?
Um, I think it might be maybe early days for best practices because we're still seeing a lot of innovation at the moment. So still very much a new dawn. But I think in that spirit of this being very early days, I think my reflection on this is that just a lot of debate on the definition of it and exactly what shape this will take is not after a certain beyond a certain point. It doesn't do anything to push the metaverse forward for now. And so instead of that debate and sort of the semantics around it and what is and isn't within the metaverse, I think it is much more beneficial to just start exploring it, right? And these don't need to be like big budget activations always. Like I would always say to client executives that I speak to, do you have the right apps on your phone and have you made an account? Do you have Roblox on your phone? Do you know that there is an app for Roblox on your phone? Do you have Spatial? Do you have a wallet? Have you tried and have you seen what the experience is? Have you interacted with other people on it? Because that's just the first step to take, right? And so that's, I think, the notion for marketers, especially in my mind right now. There is going to be a very serious and very real conversation about the ROI of efforts in the metaverse, and it's coming soon, and as it should. But I think there's also this need for creativity and innovation, and let's push the limits of what we can do with the metaverse and online worlds in general. That I think needs to be explored, right? So, just in the words of the late great Steve Jobs, I would say, stay hungry, stay foolish, for now at least.
Love that. Hamza Khan of McKinsey, thank you again, sir, so much for taking the time out. A fascinating conversation.
Thank you very much, Alicia, and thanks for having me.
And to all of you, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. Your creative wheels may be spinning a little bit. You may have some follow-up questions or ideas. We would love to hear from you. Drop us a line on Twitter at our Touchpoints or on LinkedIn at Retail Touchpoints. We'll be sure to share the link to the research as well so you can dig a little bit deeper into this fascinating data. But for now, that is it from us. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next time.